We come to the sixth gate. The sixth gate is one of the 8 gates of profiling. The sixth gate, the gate of conflict, has enormous importance in our physical lives and in our psychic lives. For it's in the sixth gate itself that the wave of the solar plex motor is generated. It comes directly out of the sixth gate. And the sixth gate, like the 50th gate, is like a funnel. It takes in all of the streams and generates all of the streams that go out of the emotional system. In other words, it generates the sensitivity, it generates the moods, it generates the feelings. All of that is rooted in the sixth gate. And more than that, the sixth gate and its motor, which operates in these various waves, that this sixth gate is the diaphragm that is either opened or closed to intimacy. It's the gate of our pH. Whether we are going to allow entry and penetration or not. Remember that the 59th gate on the other side is a genetic strategy to penetrate, but it is always up to the sixth gate whether that penetration will take place or not, and whether in fact it will be fertile or not. And it will be up to the sixth gate to condition the environment of that intimacy, because it is an emotional gate. It says above the line, the fundamental design component of progress, the law that growth cannot exist without friction. Now this is the right angle cross of Eden. The 6, the 36, the 12, and the 11. The 11 and 12 are deeply connected to our evolutionary process, as I've mentioned to you. This right angle cross of Eden is about falling from grace, so to speak. That is, these are people that have to go from paradise into the world. Midwives know this. There's a lot of incarnations that take place in which it's evident that they do not particularly want to come into the world. This is the cross of Eden. They know that that means that they have to step down into the horror of ignorance and the material plane, and that they will have a long process ahead of them to find their way in the new world. The first line, retreat. The realization that wasting one's resources against overwhelming odds is not courage but folly. Everything about the sixth gate is about not wasting resources. I mean, after all, this is a motor. It does not want to waste its resources. Pluto exalted, the power of regeneration that can embrace retreat as a phase and not a failure. That is, the emotional stability to accept conflict. Remember that on the other side in the 59-1 you have the caveman line. You know, this is its resonance, emotional stability. The first line is always introspective. You know, what does it mean to be intimate? What does it mean to be open, and what are the consequences? And because it's emotional, there's no truth in the now. When I teach about sexuality, I teach about the ignorance of our sexuality because it's based on the solar plex. And that when human beings get turned on by an emotional force, that they have absolutely no restraint. You know, the fact of the matter is that our sexuality can be absolutely clear if before we engage in any sexuality, we take time. That necessary space protects us because it allows us a perspective through the emotional wave. If you can say yes when you're up, that's easy. Can you say yes when you're down? That's not. And if you can say yes when you're up and yes when you're down, then you can take somebody into your intimacy. You can take somebody into your sexual intimacy, and it's going to be clear. That is, when you go down, they're not going to leave you and you're not going to leave them just because you've gone down. Because they've already experienced you before that moment of consummation. They've already experienced you through your wave, and you've experienced your sense of yourself with them through your wave. Oh, it's so easy for me to describe that. You know, you're undefined emotionally, you meet somebody who's defined emotionally, they're really up, they feel great, and they're horny. You're in trouble. I mean, you're in trouble. They pump you up, you feel so good, you're so hot. Now the two of you are about to make a mistake. Instead of just digging the high, wow, this is exciting, and saying, I hope it'll be exciting next week because I'm not going to do anything with you till then, so I can see if this is really real, you know, then you can find out what's there. And if you get there through the wave and you still have the strength of that attraction, then you have an intimacy that's going to be of value. And it's hard. Because unless you understand, and unless you're deep in your process, it's not like, you know, you get your design done and the next day you're going to be able to handle that. You're not. You're going to say, damn that stuff, this is good. And it's part of our conditioning that we actually will accept the destructiveness and the pain at the other end just for that good, because we think that's the only thing in town. And we think if we don't jump on it the moment that it's there, that we're never going to get it. You know, all of these emotional conditioning factors destroy our relationships and destroy the innocence that's possible in sexuality. The second line, the gorilla. You know, the second line does not know that it is particularly emotional. It doesn't know that it's in charge of the intimacy. The emotional system is where we get the words guilt, blame, and shame. These are emotional words. And so the second line doesn't know any of that. It hasn't introduced to it. Think about what happens to social channels when you're in lower trigram lines. They don't function well. The other is always a surprise. You're caught off guard. You know, the 6-2 is the resonance to the 59-2, shyness. You're caught off guard. You know, you're in your own place, you're minding your own business. You're humming along on your own motor. And all of a sudden, somebody's knocking at your window. The ability to maximize an inferior position through timely contact and withdrawal. Now, this has to be learnt. Remember, lines that have an introduction before the exalted, these are life processes. They're not automatic, functioning aspects of your code. They have to learn timely contact and withdrawal. If somebody pulls you out, go back in. Don't stay out there for long. Venus exalted, the sensitivity to find the weakest point in a conflict and to exploit it emotionally. The moment that you knock on their window, you get their wave. Every emotional person has a place in their wave that will drive somebody somewhere nuts. And it doesn't just have to be the down part. It can be the up part. Aesthetic sensitivity and mental detail can find the weakest point. And the Mars in detriment, the kamikaze, striking but moot. A lack of sensitivity that blunders into conflicts. Blunder in the sense, it's not their fault. They're not to blame. They get all the blame. You're never going to meet a 6 that doesn't carry in their backpack all kinds of blame. It's your fault. It's your fault. It's your fault. Always blamed. You know, whether their emotional system is defined or not, because they have the gate out of which the motor originates, the moment you hook up their emotional system, they have a powerful wave effect on anyone. And they really can blunder in that sense. They can release unknowingly the power of that wave because somebody knocks on their window at the wrong time. And they just burn them out. The third line. Remember, this is the cross of Eden. Allegiance. Every single one of the 6 variations in the 59 and the 6 give you all the possible genetic variations that are available to us. After all, it's out of these 2 gates that we create the genetic matrix of life. The ability to secure support and create strength out of a weak position when connected to the harmonic gate 59, mating that results in conception. However, this is a third line, bonds made and broken. You know, these are people that visit, deposit their genetic material and leave. Very common in America in the late 20th century to have casual relationships or pseudo long-term relationships, 3-4 years, in which genetic material is shared and partnerships end. It's necessary for our genetic code. These would not be necessarily people that could live together, but their genetic contribution is necessary. And the need for that genetic material by the whole demands it. So we have a lot of people who, for example, will have children from different men. And a lot of men that will have children from different women. We have this whole mixing in our genetic process now. The reason I mention this here particularly is that when you get to the Pluto in detriment, because of course Pluto was here for the generation born in 1959 and 1960, on the other side in the 59th gate, and 10 years later in the 6th gate. So this line is deeply impacted by Pluto. The Pluto in detriment, the rejection of allegiance as submission to an established order. You want to find the line of women's liberation? No joke. You want to find the line of women's liberation? This is the line because you had an enormous post-Second World War baby boom of women, and you had 2 generations of women that carried this powerfully in their design over a long term. Years and years of babies coming in with the same thing. Now, it isn't to say that it did not have an effect on males, but the fact is it just reinforced their capacity to move from partner to partner. Whereas for the female, it established her authority to dictate whether the relationship should last or not. Gave them a new power. It also brought about an enormous amount of divorce. Sensitivity to controls which may eventually reject intimacy, which may eventually. Doesn't mean that everybody who has Pluto in the 59 or the 6, which is very common, You're talking about tens of millions of people who are alive today. It doesn't mean all of them have gotten divorced. It means the vast majority of them have, and the rest have suffered. And the thing to understand is they didn't have to get divorced or suffer. So important to recognize what the third line of breaking bonds is all about. It does not mean the bond cannot be made again. It doesn't. It just means that there must be space. Intimacy, that is third line intimacy, requires space. I have a partnership with a 59-3. It's lasted 15 years. I've been away about 11 of them. It works. No joke, it works. Bonds made and broken. Otherwise, the relationship could not survive. If you get to the point that the bond is broken and you go out the door and you say, this is over, I never come back, you never come back. That's not what it is. It's, I had enough of you for now. I'm going, and when I come back, it'll be great again. And then I'll have enough of you for now, and I'll go away and come back, and it'll be great again. Then I'll have enough of you for now. If you live according to your mechanics, you can have a relationship regardless of any kind of design. And that so many beautiful relationships that could have enormous value to you in your life, you abandon out of that lack of understanding. You abandon because you blame. You abandon because you criticize and want change. Whenever you're with a partner that you're unhappy with, you're also unhappy with yourself. You don't think you have the right partner for you because you think you're supposed to be somebody else who has a different kind of partner. You don't see yourself and you don't see the other. You don't accept yourself, you don't accept the other. Every time you say you should have, you might have, you could have, why can't you? All of these common phrases in relationships, what is there is a total lack of respect, a total lack of acceptance of the holiness of an individual. You are what you are. Everybody wants to be left alone with what they are, but rarely do they leave anybody else alone. It's a two-way street. So the relationship that works is a relationship that's based on understanding the nature of your partner so that you can accept that nature, because it's not up to you why they're in your face. You didn't have any control over that. This is geometry. There's no choice in all that. You wake up every morning, you see the same person, that's love, whether you like it or not. Because that's the mystery of love. Somebody keeps staying there in your geometry. You don't know why they're there. You don't know if they're going to stay because you don't know why they came in the first place. My God, lovers saying, why me to the other? What a joke. I don't know. I could make up a reason if you like. But my bus, it stopped here, the door opened, and there you were. Period. You see, we love it when we meet that way. And we ruin it the moment we open our mouths. That magic of the geometry. And then, you don't like the way your partner looks or dresses or talks, or you don't like what they do. You don't like their taste. You don't like their smell. There's endless things that you discover when you leave your separateness and live in an aura with somebody else. And you decide that you're going to fix all that, otherwise the relationship won't work. And then you torture yourself. And you torture your partner. How nice. Fourth line. When you get to the fourth line, you get to the transpersonal quality to be intimate. And remember that the fourth line is about friendship. The 6-4 has devastating power. They are the most influential emotional people on earth because they are always externalizing their emotional field. The classic example being the 30, the fourth line burnout, where this constant externalization of feelings leads to breakdown. So they're always externalized, not their fault. Not like they should feel uncomfortable with that. It is their nature. Triumph, a position of natural and unchallengeable power. The Son exalted, the charity and wisdom that must come with victory and the movement towards new horizons, the power of emotions to dominate a relationship. Now, that externalization is to externalize that intimacy, to externalize that emotional wave for intimacy, but they don't stop. And because they don't stop, they can be very uncomfortable to their partners. They have to get to a point where They recognize that their emotional control of the environment can be damaging to their partner. And of course, out of friendship, they can do that. This is where the wave of kindness-meanness is born. If you're the friend, then you don't have to let that emotional system totally overwhelm them. But if it's your lover, then you externalize to overwhelm. And then you go from being kind to being mean. And back again, by the way. And back again. After you burn them out, you try to lift them up again. Pluto in detriment, the conqueror and the purger. The lack of emotional control that is destructive in relationships. Yeah. One of the things to see about the fourth line is that the fourth line, which is condemned by its design to seek out intimacy through friendship first, can develop deep frustrations. Deep frustrations. Not really being able to have the intimacy that it looks like exists around them. Everybody else has got a lover, I got a lot of friends. And out of that can come an emotional frustration that simply burns people out. And of course, they burn people out who do not become something more than a friend. And then they lose their friends. In the last 7 minutes and 30 seconds of this fourth line, you have the change in the design, sun and earth, and it moves away from the 11 and 12 to the 10 and 15. So we have the 6, the 36, the 10, and the 15, and we are now in the juxtaposition cross of conflict. So here are people whose fixed fate it is to triumph emotionally and purge others. Now again, you can hear that and say, woo. But that is their purpose. I mean, that's what they're here for. And it says to you, don't challenge them emotionally. Don't try to control the intimacy. Because if you do that, they're always going to overwhelm you emotionally. But it also means that as a cross, they are fixed on intimacy. They're fixed on either being open to intimacy or closed. And anywhere in between, depending on the wave and how they live out their life process. They can be obsessed with sex. They can be obsessed with having children. They can be obsessed with being neuter. They can be obsessed with despising children. The left angle cross is called the left angle cross of the plane. Plane. This left angle cross of the plane, this is the movement. The movement is the cross of Eden to conflict to the plane. This is the ability to adapt to the world. The cross of Eden, where you fall from the paradise into the world, is difficult because it is lower trigram and it's an inner process. And of course, this is the most tribal of gates in a way. It's all about support. And when you get down to the left angle, to the upper trigram, to the transpersonal gift in a social channel, you have this ability to operate on the material plane, to leave Eden behind, to enter into the realm of the devil's world. Da, 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 da. I should make spooky music now and all this stuff. It doesn't mean these people are all black magicians. It's not true. It doesn't mean that these people are involved in dark things. It's not true. It's that they are totally involved with the success, the survivability on the material plane. And can be quite cruel in that, because the material plane is like that. You know, when you're in Eden, all you have to do is pick a fruit, just one. And before you even pick that fruit, you don't even have to eat. And the moment that you pick the fruit and you come into the world, then you have to eat. And when you have to eat, you have to kill. So the left angle cross of the plane carries with it an inherent violence. Now don't go around looking at people with a 6-5 and saying, oh shit, this one's really violent. You know, be careful with all that. It simply means that survivability on the plane requires that capacity. You know, that's so evident in a frontier country like America, where this recognition of the inherent presence of violence is always part of life. Fifth line, transpersonal line, arbitration. The faith derived from analytical diligence and emotional control, which permits a higher authority to judge a conflict. Now, of course, we know about the 6-5s. They're seducers. They're the general on the outside. Everybody thinks, oh, I'd love to see what it's like to fuck this one. Doesn't necessarily mean they get that advantage. So there is a projection field around these people that says that they can be very open or very closed. They can be very emotional or not. It's all a projected field. And that's why the word arbitration is there. Because until they can see through the projection, they don't know what they're really getting. Venus exalted harmony further through the avoidance of direct conflict. Again, you get this sense of the inherent retreat in the fifth line. You know, if you don't try to become intimate with people all the time, you don't end up with all those intimacy conflicts. Even though you're designed for intimacy. You're a fifth line. You're waiting for intimacy that comes in the time of crisis. You realize that you're alone. You don't want to be alone. You're waiting for that moment. And in that moment where it's possible, then you can turn on your seductive charms. Then you can try to break through the aura and be intimate. Then you can put out your emotional wave and hope that you can bring the other in. But it's practical. 6-5s are never going to have anything to do with you unless it's practical. Yeah, I don't mind going over to her apartment because the parking's easy. It's true. It's true. It's amazing what goes on in human beings, eh? If it's not practical for them, they're not going to be able to get involved in a relationship. They're just not. They'd rather be there alone out there on their farm, being emotional with themselves, and not getting involved, unless it can really be practical. You know, my taxes are too high, I better get married. I mean, it's about practicality. It doesn't mean it's not nice, or whatever. It just has to be practical. By the way, when it is practical, because this is the universalization, you know, everybody wants this. Everybody wants to have relationships, intimacy that are really practical, because otherwise the product of that intimacy can never be raised in a healthy way, and the whole genetic process has been denied. I mean, after all, that intimacy is a genetic imperative that's there to make sure that the right genetic information enters into the gene pool consistently so the species stays alive. And because of the complexity of what it is to be human as a mechanism, that the mother and father, that the genetic source has to nurture the child for 7 years. That requires practicality. And so the universalization of intimacy is intimacy that is reproductive. You know, then we see the real practicality. They didn't just fuck. They made a family, they made a life together, they had a future to, blah, 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 all these things that come with it. This is in the 5. Moon in detriment, where a party to arbitration sees itself as the best possible judge and will only accept judgment if it is the victor. Insensitivity to the concerns of others in a conflict. Insensitivity the moment it's not practical. Any 6 gate can burn you out. Anyone. And they know the other. The 6-5 knows the seduction game. It knows the 59-5 at the other end. It knows what's at stake. The 6th line. It's another one of these lines that I love for the perverse reason that everybody thinks it's great. And it's a joke. And only Americans could possibly understand this joke. What was called the peacemaker in American history? The Colt 45. It's a gun. It was called the Great Peacemaker. It's what the cowboys wore. They shot people with Colt 45s. It was called the peacemaker. Nice line you got there. You got the peacemaker? How nice. The discipline and integrity of a superior force. I got the gun. The discipline and integrity of a superior force to unilaterally cease conflict to permit surrender and survival of its foe. Now, of course, they have to learn that. And while they're learning that, they hurt a lot of people. They go through this process that they learn through their 3rd line youth, of the trial and error of getting into and breaking the bonds. And they learn to recognize that they're the result, that they are the source, that they are the problem. And when I say problem, I only mean that in the unaware sense. That is, the 6-6s will withdraw completely from intimacy because they see that they themselves distort the intimacy and that they don't make it work. Remember, wisdom is always possible in the 6th line. Like the 59-6, its resonance, it will be early in its life, sexually indiscreet, only to recognize that it's not worth it because it doesn't lead anywhere. And remember that 6 lines are transpersonal with a greater perspective. They don't just know there's a gate at the other end of the channel. They're looking towards the whole circuit. If I'm intimate with this person, will this relationship survive? Is it practical enough that we will be able to live together, to nurture each other, to build a life together? It asks many, many questions. And it realizes that its own power to be emotional minimalizes its opportunities for long-term relationships. It learns in life that it's better not to be intimate unless it finds the perfect intimacy. So it learns to keep its gun in its holster. Mercury exalted. The highest form of reason is that life is sacred. Now, in the analogy of this keynote, this is giving up violence. This is giving up on being emotional. This is giving up on intimacy. Venus in detriment, the peacemaker whose actions are just but whose terms are unacceptable. The emotional power to end conflict, but only after one's conditions have been satisfied. I won't shoot you if you give me, and then I'll let you go. And because they do that when they're young, they don't like it. It is, after all, the gate of conflict. It leads to a lot of pain, and the pain belongs to anyone who's connected in that process. The unaware 6-6 suffers deeply in its life. And its withdrawal to the mountaintop is a crawling up to get away from all that. And in order for it to come back, in order for it to see that intimacy really is possible for it, an intimacy that allows it to live out its emotional nature, where it goes is to the love of the body. It goes into the vessel of love. It goes to the 46th gate. Sex is sex, but love, that's another story. And if you cannot find it through the sexuality, then you have to be able to find it through the love. And that love will make that possible for the 6-6. So we move to the 46th hexagram.